Most of the time when discussing regime change, we tend to think in a transition to democracy. The notion that the West has cultivated is one of the ideas of acceptance towards the inclusion of many sectors within the system. However, the Latin American case of the last century seems to be opposed to this idea, since it is observed that the transitions are not unidirectional and these changes can be toward authoritarian regimes even when a democracy already existed. Evaluating these cases, the intrigue of political sciences is to explain how there can be a return to authoritarianism when it seemed that a system that benefited and included everyone was already in place. The different authors vary in their explanations regarding the characteristics of the Latin American democracies that made this transition possible. Guillermo O'Donnell, regarding bureaucratic authoritarianism in modernized societies, points out that these regimes came to power after periods of considerable organized political strife, lack of consensus under democratic governments, limited pluralism, political apathy, and aborted revolutions. Alfred Stephan explains that the development of authoritarian systems is nourished thanks to military ideology and the expansion of the role of the army in society. Other authors, like Joseph Cohen, establishes that democracies imposed from above end up polarizing and radicalizing society, creating a window of opportunity for the establishment of autocratic model. There are many alternatives to explain each specific case, but in this video we will focus on the thesis that encompasses much of the situation: resources. It was the unequal distribution of these resources that served as an instrument to strengthen political power on the part of dominant elites.
What do we mean by resources? Even when certain authors emphasize economic resources, we distinguish three types that explains better the transitions. By resources we mean a set of tools that allow substances of a group and increase the ability to influence within the political systems and serve to a specific purpose. The first is the political resource, which is composed of the ability to spread the ideology and to create coalitions. The first serves as a mechanism that provides legitimacy to society, while the second ensures survival within the systems. This resource can be obtained in different ways. It can be through the bureaucratic way and electoral, or the partisan or military. Coalitions may involve the coexistence of incumbents with other groups such as radical sector, economics, or other elites, and representatives of the popular sector, or exclude them whenever they are considered as a threat. The second resource is the economic one, which proportionally increases the ability of an elite to act. Once inside the states, they have resources available to grow and allow their use for specific purposes of the elite. This resource can serve as a source of repression and political persecution, or to vie the opposition. Clientelism and patronage, the way in which the state concedes natural resources, is also vital to maintain power. The third one is the one that varies the most in its meaning, since it depends on the case threatened. This consists on the strategic one, which covers the historical context and the functional of the particular institution and of the particular case. The way in which the actor enrolls democratic institutions to take over authoritarian power is fundamental to understand the behavior and the strategy adopted in the pursuit of its objective. In this way, the actor evaluates its context and uses the resources to create window of sort opportunity. Within this evaluation, the path dependency is incorporated, which explains the social situation, the dissatisfaction of different groups with the regime and the political or economic crisis that arose previously. These three factors are interdependent because they need each other in order to make a successful transition, even if that means that you do not need the three to work in parallel with the same intensity. This serves to understand the type of authoritarianism that is being established, since it can have a high degree of politicization, where formal institutions respond to the interests of a political group or groups, and their alliances are also modified according to the situation, or also can be a dogmatic authoritarianism that respects the existence rules and gets through other illicit mechanisms to keep power. If something is clear, is that the systems are not classified only in democratic or authoritarian absolute powers. Among them, there is a spectrum that varies according to the intensity with which the three resources are monopolized.
Another distinction that could be made to this classification is that of the group to which the actors that come to power belong. In the military case, we observe a clear example in the Brazilian case. At the beginning of the decade of the 60s, there was a disproportionate growth in the industrial aspect, and adding this to the inauguration of the democratic system that is being imposed from above, we obtain a radicalized and polarized democracy in which the right exaggerates the potential threat of the left to the middle class. In response, the left takes advantage of this attack to win the vote of the working class. Having a polarized context, the existence of a working class is added with little or no political organization that is forced to choose between the extremes, which leads to the emergence of opportunistic and modern forms of autocracy, such as the 1964 military regime established in Brazil. Similarly, it is observed that after the establishment of this regime, the military elite takes advantage of the scope that it may have to participate in the government, to make use of the political resource by spreading a military ideology in which they legitimize themselves before the population. Similarly, the development of professionalization allows an expansion of roles and functions that increase the income of the state, facilitating the execution of projects thanks to the use of economic resource. In summary, the Brazilian case makes use of the three factors as follows: politics, through the radicalization of the left to take power; economic, to finance projects, professionalize and increase the role of the state before the society; and the institutional strategy, because it takes advantage of the gaps left by a de facto radically polarized democracy. In the civil case, there are hegemonic parties, like the case of the PRI in Mexico, or any party that is capable of changing institutions and forming coalitions to seize power, as it is the case of Venezuela with the rise of Chavez. The change of the Mexican regime, in particular, since the elections were respected and the multi-party system in theory, but there were electoral fraud and mechanisms to buy the radicals. The context was important to determine the type of authoritarianism that arose since the revolution of 1910, that resulted in violence and the fractionalization of the actors. This caused that a radical dictatorship was not possible. A party that was created capita to incorporate all sectors of the population, military elites, economics, work movements, in the corporatist style. To maintain power, they did not become military repression, but coalitions, which often meant giving economic resources. The PRI used the resources of the state for specific purposes of the party. Its main mechanism was patronage and clientelism, which were possible thanks to the control of the bureaucracy. Funds were transferred from the public budget via state-owned enterprises. It could use the economic power of the state to generate corporate kickbacks and contributions to the government contracts and economic protection. They could also grant jobs in favor of which more was debt to the party. Thus, The state resources were used to recruit, campaign, and mobilize voters in favor to the party. Once in power, there are two dilemmas to maintain the balance of the regime. The PRI remained from 1920 to 2000.
In economic terms, at the moment of economic growth and improvement of quality of life, society is willing to maintain the regime. But if there is a change in growth, society can be revealed, regardless of the consequences this might generate. The key consisted of the economic policies. In times of boom, they could raise more with more interventionist policies. On the contrary, in times of crisis, they resorted to economic liberalization policies. This is to say that the PRI knew how to move in the ideological spectrum to adapt to the economic situation. With the farmers, the strategy was different because they keep them with the basics so not to spend more resources.
The case of Venezuela also enters the second classification, where civil party raised up to power. Hugo Chavez followed a series of steps to change the system and state in government. First, he creates a constitution that will give more power to the president in order to avoid dependence in Congress. This constituted the elimination of checks and balances. Secondly, he polarized the system to punish opponents ideologically. Number 3, he used oil money to keep his allies aligned. Number 4, given the institutional erosion and the high political competition, its public spending was toward clientelism. And last one, he used job discrimination, the idea of a watchful government, selective impunity, and government radicalization. The relevant thing is that the opposition was deposed from its resources to such an extent that organizing was in a very high cost. In the case of promotion to military power, political recurses had more relevance than in the economic one. In the civil cases, it's the opposite. On the other hand, all the authoritarian cases needed to carry out strategies to adapt the use of two factors to the historical and institutional context. One lessons learned in that transitions do not happen with the popular endorsement. Rather, they are a process in which little by little resources are monopolized until reaching a point where the actor in power gets rid of the checks and balances and the current law of democracy, as well as the existing opposition.